well, we get together and we have a meeting, we might discuss some things, but we're not even having the commitment to making any action points coming out of it, let alone those that are recorded, let alone those ones that have a time frame to them. So it's like, well, you're really shooting yourself in the foot here.
The question is from Thinking Focus.
Hi, I'm Ricky.
Hello, I'm Rob.
And today, this is the third part of our 4-part series on communication.
Great.
And the question is, what common communication mistakes trip us up? I was really worried because I thought I was going to trip up over that question.
Well, and, we've said this before in other podcasts, we could be here for hours because there's probably hundreds, but that would not be very helpful either to us trying to think about it or to anybody who might be wanting to listen to this podcast. So let's think about a few examples of really, really common ones. Do you attend meetings at all, Ricky?
Yes.
Online, face-to-face?
Yes.
All of the above. Meetings is a good place to start because I think we all have probably too many meetings to attend to. And I saw a stat the other day, and I can't really quote it because I can't remember the source of it, but some scary number about the average person across many industries probably attends about 62 meetings a month. And the stat went on to say, and felt that at least 50% of those were ineffective. So there's got to be something wrong with communications in meetings.
Well, how scary is that then? If you go,
yeah.
More importantly, they're still turning up to 62 meetings, despite the fact they feel half of them are either pointless, irrelevant, or certainly not getting the value.
Yeah.
And you go, why is that? Are meetings too big? Are they too long?
Have they invited too many people?
Lacking focus? You go, because I know I've been there. You got somebody droning on.
Yes.
And, you pick up your phone.
Yeah.
In fact, one of our colleagues used to have on the front of his screen, his phone screen, his screensaver said, "Be present."
Be present.
And yet he'd spend more time, he knows who he is, he'd spend more time looking at his phone than any of us. It was just ironic. It was brilliant.
Yeah. But no, meetings fundamentally flawed, really, unless we're very clear in what the objective of the meeting is, unless we're attending the meeting for exactly the reasons that are pertinent to us and pertinent to the other people in there. It is a tried and tested communication methodology because we have to get people in a room to discuss some things, you would presume. But actually, there are so many things that we could get wrong in meetings and unfortunately do go wrong in meetings, as you said.
But you wonder how many action points are lost.
Yes.
How many action points get missed? How many do we not follow through next time round, so we don't hold people to account for things that they've taken responsibility for? I mean, the list, like you say, is endless. That's a whole podcast series in its own.
I was working with a client just the other week where I said, the whole issue about, well, the last couple of meetings haven't been all that good. And innocently, although I guess I had an agenda, I said, well, so presumably you guys have some action points that come out of all meetings, do you? And there was a deathly silence. It's sort of almost like, well, we get together and we have a meeting, we might discuss some things, but we're not even having the commitment to making any action points coming out of it, let alone those that are recorded, let alone those ones that have a time frame to them, and let alone those ones that have a name put against them. No action points, zip, nada. So it's like, well, you're really shooting yourself in the foot here.
Absolutely. And you wonder why your meetings are not effective.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So that's meetings.
So tell me a bit about the impact of assumptions then, Rob.
Well, the difficulty here is that actually in the myriad of distractions that we've just talked about, but also the over communication of information, our tendency typically is to try to shortcut all of that. and a big shortcut is just to make some assumptions about what's just been said, about what's going to be said, about what's going to happen as a result of what's being said. So our tendency typically as humans is to hear a bit of information, fill in the blanks, and get the blank filling absolutely wrong. So assumptions can be very dangerous. They can be misleading. They can cause us to tune out, unfortunately, from the information that's being received because we might not be listening for understanding. We're just listening, if you like, with half an ear or half a brain or half a level of concentration, however you'd like to describe that. And so I think assumptions are made a lot and are very dangerous because of the sheer volume.
And
Um,
but I think it's natural. I think, let's not beat ourselves up. I mean, the reaction of, we've got a workload that's probably coming out of our ears.
mhm,
We're up against it on time, and yet we're in another meeting. And our boss is demanding that report or that piece of work that he allocated us. So we're kind of going, right. I've heard a key word or phrase
mhm,
that means this,
yes.
and I therefore engage my short circuit
Mhm,
element of my brain and go straight to what I think the solution is.
absolutely.
And to your point, that's dangerous because
It is.
if you're, we've all seen Jurassic Park when you put frog DNA in,
Well, I mean, even if you take this to its extremes, right? And I think the extremes are happening day to day in business, by the way. But the extreme is, I hear that I've been invited to a meeting. I make an assumption based on previous meetings with the same group of people that they're all useless, and they have been useless in the past. So I make that same assumption for this coming meeting, which probably means that I am not present for the entirety of the meeting. I go in there with such a negative mindset towards it that I think the whole thing is irrelevant. But actually, I do this fundamental error of, but I'll turn up anyway because I'm supposed to turn up and waste an hour of my day, and then probably complain about it afterwards. By the way, but another point. So at its extreme, the assumption might not even be happening in a meeting or part of a communication with a colleague. It might have happened before. So it's closed our minds down to even starting to receive some information, starting to consider communication that might be made.
but I suppose that one of the other assumptions is that we, depending on our level, we
Mm.
assume that because we've been invited to a meeting, we have to go. And,
Yes.
and we're in danger of making this all about meetings, by the way, but they're a
Yeah.
common area of where communication definitely trips us up. And I think, you know, challenge, why do you need to be there?
Yeah.
Is it relevant for you? Can you send somebody else?
Mm.
Do we even need to be there?
Yeah.
Are we making some decisions? Because if, you're wasting 50% of your time in meetings that you shouldn't be at,
Sure.
then that's a good way to find some time to do the job.
Well, true story.
Okay, okay, let's move on from meetings and
Yes. Where do we want to go?
let's unpack the thorny issue of email. Now, everybody's gone, oh no, not email.
Oh no. Well, do you know what? Emails are brilliant. They're quick, they're efficient, they are sort of quite specific because if I want to talk to you, I know that I can use your email address and send you an email. And actually, if I'm talking to you, but I think that actually somebody else probably needs to know that information as well, I can put them on CC. That means that I've covered all my bases.
You mean covered your arse, don't you?
Oh, you found me out.
You're far too eloquent. Leave that to me.
So, I mean, you can get why people use email because of all of the reasons that I've just listed. It is quick and efficient, but it is so overused. And of course, maybe we are covering our ass, and that's a fundamental error in it all. But of course, there are real problems with email. Not just thinking about the volume of traffic. It's it. How do they get interpreted? Just because I've sent you an email, which I think is clear, do you receive that email and interpret it the way that I intended you to? Do you have an emotional response because it seems like it's quite curt and abrupt, and I'm maybe accusing you of something that you haven't done? The receiver typically determines the intent, and I'm not necessarily in control of that just because I sent the email. I might have sent it with the right intent and thought that I'd put the right message in it, but I could have got that horribly wrong. And there's other things in this as well, because what happens if you being the recipient of an email, let's say, you're not in the mood. The mindset that you have in actually receiving my particular email about my subject. I mean, I'm An email is an interruption in your day. You could have quite happily been getting on with other things that are absolutely relevant, absolutely pertinent. And then all of a sudden, ping, an email turns up and it's from me and it's about stuff that you weren't expecting and you might not even see as part of your job. So that's going to influence your reaction, isn't it? And the potential response you give.
Well, you and I both know the individual I'm about to talk about, who shall remain nameless. But
I'll name them.
for some time, we went through a process of receiving emails on a Sunday evening. So this person would effectively do work at weekends.
Mm,
We're busy with our families, having worked really hard the week before.
mm,
And then I know my personal reaction was it was a trigger.
mm.
And that trigger wasn't a good trigger. And then I'd spend the entire journey driving to work the next day, bending the ear of one of my colleagues, going, "I can't believe what they've said now." Basically they'd had an emotional reaction at the weekend about something they'd found.
Right.
They'd then catastrophized it,
Yeah.
and then rather than taking some time to craft an email, it basically became a list of tasks. So
Yes.
irrelevant of what I got planned for the week, all of a sudden this now was number one priority.
Right.
And
Right.
you go, but all of that is based on feeling and not fact.
Yes.
There is limited evidence to suggest that the whole world is ending just because of this one thing that they've found.
Right.
And literally I would hide my phone on a Sunday evening because I dreaded receiving this particular email. It
Sure.
just sent me into a spiral. It wasn't healthy.
Right.
And you think, how are we causing our people to feel about email particularly? Because and I'm flavoring this around your mindset and mood.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, my
Yeah.
mood immediately changed in
Of
my
course.
family time, and that's not fair on them.
No. No. Of course. And yet, and I'm not leaping to the defense, but just trying to work out what might have been in the head of the person who sent it. They could have thought, well, I'm being quite efficient here because I'm sending an email out of hours to enable the other person to have some consideration of the issues that I'd like them to think about before we then reconvene on Monday morning in a normal workday. And gosh, isn't that clever of me because I'm saving everybody some time? Yeah,
Yeah,
and I'm playing absolute devil's advocate on that because I don't believe that for a minute that
but
that was what was going on in the person's mind. But
but
that could quite easily be the justification of it.
But you're right. You're right.
Yeah,
Absolutely. The intention, am I judging the action or the intention? And I was
yeah,
judging the action.
yeah.
And the problem for me was it became a pattern, and
Yes,
that became a trigger for
of
me. And that
course.
that was my poor colleague whose ears are he probably has
Bleeding.
hearing aids now, but they were
Yeah.
definitely bleeding. But you go, what are we doing
Yeah,
that we're creating these unintended consequences?
absolutely.
And not least the fact you get this email, and the first thing is you got a load of questions, so you got to go back and clarify off the points.
Sure.
And is it an overreaction,
Yes.
or is it a fair reaction or response to something? And that for me is always the challenge with email. It's so
Always.
impersonal. Yes, it's
Yes.
efficient. It's definitely not effective,
No.
because it leads to much. And text messaging is the same, by the way. WhatsApp message is the same.
Yes.
So anything that is open to interpretation, which
Yeah.
is why even the chat functions in the likes of Teams
Yes.
or Slack or other software is available, by the way. But you go, even they allow an interaction. So you
Well,
go, well, what do you mean by that, Rob? And how does that mean? And what about this?
true
Um,
story.
and so at least there's a level of interaction with chat, whereas text and email definitely is a real weapon in organizations if it's not managed properly.
Yes. Well, and I think that sort of also gives us a nice connection into the final thing we wanted to talk about in terms of common communication mistakes, which is the information overload. Because the other element of emails is because, and you've probably received them, I know I have. Sometimes the sheer volume of information contained in one email it's not a message that's been received. It's like an essay that's been sent. And that's just that content. But the overload of information also impacts in terms of the number of people that get copied in. I mean, how many people are on copy? And I know I mentioned that before, but 14 people might be receiving information from this one email, and they're all going, "Hang on a second, I don't even need that information. What's it to do with me?" And that's just email. But in general, common communication mistakes. Well, are we really giving pertinent information to the right people in the right way at the right time, or is there information overload? And information overload might be because there's too many sources of information. It might be that information is given too much to too many people without it being specific.
Well, I had a rule that if I was CC'd, I deleted it because I weren't
Right,
important to make the top line. So,
right,
if you're arse covering by copying me in, I'm
yes,
not interested.
yeah,
If it's relevant and pertinent to me, send it to me, but
yes,
don't copy me in.
yeah, true
Um,
story. I used
so
to work with a team from an information overload point of view, who my predecessor always had a regular meeting with the team, as I'm sure good practice dictates you should. But the meeting was very definitely seen as a top-down meeting. The manager had a meeting with their team every Friday or whenever it happened to be. All the agenda was set out, all the information was given, and the meeting minutes, when I started reading through them, were boring right from the outset. And I questioned how relevant they were. And so I decided to just flip that on its head right from the outset and say, by the way, this is a meeting for the team, which means it's not my meeting as your manager, it's your meeting as the team. So what would you like to see on the agenda? Now, it took a few weeks for people to get used to that because it was such a strange change in behavior. But I basically wanted them to bring to the table, bring to the discussion what they wanted to talk about, not what I wanted to talk about. I mean, I was a participant, I could bring things too, but it was about, I would like to know what you guys need to know, which sort of enables them to control the flow of information rather than it just to be given. So it just, that caused me
but
to sort of think about that.
but you've engaged them, you've
Yeah,
involved them,
yeah.
and I think that's a nice little segue to go, so how do we overcome some of these common mistakes?
First thing that comes to mind for me is active or attentive listening, whichever way you would like to sort of put that label to it. But it's basically listening with the intent of understanding what's being said, what's being communicated, what's being shared. Because what we're doing here is, if we're going to practice attentive listening, it will help us to avoid picking up on the wrong thread, not focusing on what is really relevant here, what the real context of what the communication is. So that would
Which
be the first one.
And I think that leads nicely into number two around assumptions, because
Right.
if you're on the wrong thread, you've made some assumptions, you've made some leaps,
Yes.
and therefore we need to make sure that we're testing for assumptions, getting
Okay.
to that clarity, building in feedback loops. One of the things I love um, is something that Brene Brown of Dare to Lead um, talks about, which
Yes.
is, she uses this term paint done,
Okay.
which is, so if we're talking about getting something achieved, moving it forward, she'll ask the question, so paint done for me, which is her way of getting the person that she's talking to replay what they've agreed,
Right.
what the standard is, what the expectations are, and of course that important timeline that goes with it. I love this concept of paint done. So,
Brilliant.
effectively, tell me what we've just said.
Great. A good one. The third one would be to provide purpose. So, why are we doing this? Let's give absolute clarity. Let's enable, and again, I would tie that into the feedback description you've just given. Let's have a quick discussion about what the purpose of this particular communication is, what the action is, what the intent is, what you need, what I need, managing expectations. We have to have a why as part of the discussion if we're going to make communication better, because then we're avoiding, and I think you mentioned it before, maybe it was on another podcast, because I know it's a favorite expression of yours, but we're avoiding the wriggle room. We're not letting that sneak in so that people go, well, this wasn't discussed, which means I've got some wriggle room. Let's be really clear on the purpose.
Brilliant. And You won't be surprised to hear this. Avoid email where
Well,
possible.
we've got to talk about email. Yeah.
Yeah, wherever possible, avoid it.
Hmm.
Have conversations to remove that ambiguity, that wriggle room. Um, I like to use email more as confirming what we've agreed
Right.
rather
Nice.
than
Yeah.
let's share it all. So that way, I can go, I can ask the question at the end that says, is this your belief? Is this your understanding?
Yes.
So that there is an open forum to challenge that says, actually, no, I thought we said this and it was on this date and I thought you were doing that and not me, and all of that stuff. So, and I think there are organizations that are almost on bans for email in certain cases.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I worked with an organization 4 or 5 years ago where they had email free Friday. And again, it takes quite a while for people to sort of get what that really means. But the unfortunate thing was that people didn't email on a Friday, but then they just stacked the bases on Thursday and then stacked the bases again on Monday, because Friday was missing. But, after a little while, people get to sort of understand that we're using too much email and we're not using it well. So let's think about another way. So yeah, I agree with you. Avoid email where possible.
I read somewhere recently that millennials don't like face-to-face conversations.
No,
They much prefer to use, something like
some sort of platform. Yeah,
a platform, text, or the
instant
e-
messenger or whatever. Yeah.
email, instant messaging, chat functions. They'd much prefer to do that. They've lost this art of face-to-face conversation and
Yes,
camaraderie and engagement that comes with that. And you go,
absolutely.
I've only got to look at my 12-year-old when he's sat in front of his phone with his mates. But
Yeah.
in fairness, he's more FaceTime with his mates than he is messaging. So, which is quite good.
So the next one is about sitting on emotional responses before acting on them.
Well, this is back to our friend, isn't it?
Well, but you're right, because if we're going to be sending an email or responding to an email, let's sit on that, sit on the emotional response so that we don't just fire off a little, fiery response. So let's recognize that, there's an emotional response that's going to come first before a rationalization can occur. So sit on it before you send it. But I think we can apply that also to face-to-face communications or interactions that we might have one-to-one, because if there's something that's kicking off an emotional response for us, I mean, what's that time served expression? Sleep on it. Go away and think about it for a while before you then come back and give a more considered response.
Yes, many careers will be saved in adhering to this tip.
Absolutely. So, you may not even, by doing that rationalization, you may not send the email that you're intending to send at all. You're giving yourself the chance to modify your response to what's been received. And dare I say it, maybe even go back to seek clarification, maybe feedback, because you're going back to the person to go, let me just talk about, or let us just talk about what happened yesterday or what happened this morning. Can I just clarify with you so that we're not both working at some sort of misconception about it?
Absolutely. So I suppose the final one comes back to me in terms of, if you are going to send some sort of communication,
Mm,
help your receiver, reader, or whoever it might be,
mm.
help them understand what is information and what is important and needs action. So
Okay.
almost help them with, whether it's an exec summary perhaps, or whether it's a list of key points, help me to scan because we're all busy.
Mm.
So a diatribe of text that I've got to wade through to
Yeah.
find out. And you're relying on me to guess the right things, by the way.
Yeah.
So make it really clear and really easy that I know that these are the 3 key points I need to think about, and that there's some timelines attached to those that are crucial because you, as going back to an earlier point you mentioned, have shared why this is important for me.
Yeah.
So I get
Yeah.
that this is relevant.
No, great.
What a great place to end on that then.
Yes. Good.
We've got one more to go, haven't we, Rob?
We have got one more to go. Yes. And let's do that in 3 months' time.
Yeah. Right. Well, we'll see you in part 4, which will
Okay.
follow in a couple of weeks' time.
Next time on The Question Is.
Which actually is so closely tied into feedback, isn't it? Which would be another comms sort of superhero skill set, where you have to acknowledge in the expectations sort of conversation that this is a two-way thing. We can then have an ongoing mechanism where we go, I'm going to seek feedback on a continual basis to make sure that that understanding is there.
To find out how Thinking Focus can unlock the potential within your organization, go to www.thinkingfocus.com, where you'll discover more about the work we do, helping our clients increase productivity and enable change.